Greetings. In continuation to our last lecture on conflict management, we are going to look at the causes of conflicts and the strategies to overcome conflicts in this lecture. We've seen how conflicts are very important aspects. We've also seen that conflicts have their own positive outcomes as well. But conflicts cannot be left on for a longer period of time for the organizations. Conflicts need to be managed and handled by the organizations at the earliest. Conflicts need to be addressed. So, in the attempt to look at the conflicts that are there, we are first going to review the causes that leads on to the conflicts that are there, and then we are going to look at the strategies by which conflicts can be handled. We are going to start with the causes of the conflicts that are there. Conflicts are caused due to many reasons. They may arise due to simple miscommunications or due to structural aspects. The causes are broken down into 4 different aspects for better understanding. As we have already seen that conflicts can be there in an organization simply because 2 personalities clash, or simply because 2 people do not get along with each other, or could be because of the structural aspects of the organization, or could be because of the goals and the roles in an organization. So, in order to understand the causes of conflicts in a little bit better format, we will break them down into 4 parts and try to understand them better. The first is communication, by far the most important and the crucial aspect of conflict. Poor communication is a powerful aspect in causing conflicts. Misunderstood or partially understood information during communication can determine the success or failure of the task at hand. Filtering of information is one of the main reasons for information not being passed on properly in the organizations. Let's understand what this means and what it says. If communication is not proper, it will lead to communications as simple as that. If communication does not carry on into the prescribed format with the prescribed information, it will lead on to either miscommunications, or will lead on to misunderstandings, or will lead on to partial informations. In all the 3 cases, the conflict is bound to arise, and it is going to lead on to a conflict in the organization. So, the first and the most important cause of conflict in an organization can be termed as communication. Let's move on to the other components and the things which cause conflicts in the organizations. The second most crucial and the most important aspect which causes conflicts in the organization is the behavioral aspects as such. These conflicts arise because of the personality traits of individuals. These conflicts may also be based on aspects like religion, sex, race, geographical area, etc. Let's understand this cause. Behavioral traits or behavioral pattern of people leads to conflicts. That's what we are looking at. In other words, it means that the behavior of individuals leads on to conflicts. Now, these behavioral traits could be because of many reasons. It could be because of religious differences. It could be because of non-compatibility of the different sexes. It could be because of the race or the culture a person belongs to. It could be because of the geographical location a person comes from, and so on and so forth. Basically, saying that people may not get along with each other, people may not understand each other, people may not support each other. This is a behavioral trait, and wherever this situation happens or arises, it leads on to a conflict, and conflicts arising due to this are called as the behavioral aspects causing conflicts. Let's move on to the next reason for the conflicts that are there. Is the structural aspect of conflict, which means these types of conflicts are there due to the structural design of the organization. The related factors are divisible as under. We are looking at conflicts arising out of the structural design of an organization, which means conflicts which are there because organization has a certain kind of structure which is there. To understand this conflicts, we have broken down the structural aspects into different parts. The first part under the structural aspect of conflict is the size of the organization itself, which means if an organization is big in terms of the number of people it employs, it is bound to have more conflicts. Larger the size of the organization, larger the number of conflicts. In large organizations, less clarity, more supervisory levels, greater chances of information getting diluted and distorted are aspects that are potential reasons for conflicts. Let's try and understand this first component of the structural aspect of conflict. It works on the simple principle of directly proportional aspects, which means more the number of people, more conflicts. More the number of hierarchy, more conflicts it will lead on to. More the channels through which information flows in an organization, more diluted and distorted information spreading into the organization. So, we put the cause of conflict in organization due to the structuring of the organization, which could arise because of the size of the organization itself. This is precisely the reason why larger organizations tend to run their businesses as standalone units. Why organizations try to have operational aspects running at the unit itself rather than centrally controlling and centrally managing it, because this helps in better management and helps in better control of the organization and the conflicts at the organizational levels. Let's move on to the second component of the structural aspects, which means conflicts arising because of the structural design of the organization, and in that the reason for conflicts is the line and staff distinctions. Before we go ahead and understand this structural conflict, let's first understand what is line and what is staff. Let's understand the line functions first. The line functions are the working operational staff of any organization. They are the people who handle the core activities in an organization, like the production or the sales. Or in simpler terms, or for a layman understanding, line are the people who are the workers in an organization. Line are the people who are actually doing the operational jobs in an organization. Let's understand what is staff. Staff is generally the advisory and the supportive people in the organization. They are people who are working, for example, in the research and development departments, or people in the HR department, or people in the PR departments. Basically, the staff is the supporting factor for the line functions. Any organization, if it has to run smoothly, has to have its line and staff functions aligned, which means the support staff is supposed to support the line functions and run the organization in a better and a cordial manner. But most of the conflicts in organizations are due to the line and staff distinctions, as you see on the slide. Let's understand why and how the line and the staff conflicts arise and how and line staff distinctions can be understood. So the line and staff needs to go hand in hand and have to avoid the conflict aspects arising, because if they do not do that, it leads on to a lot of conflicts in the organization. Let's move on and see what causes and creates the conflict between the line and staff. The main sources of conflict between line and staff are that the staff advises and the line decides and acts. This leaves the staff feeling powerless. The main problem which arises, which leads to conflicts in an organization as far as line and staff goes, is that staff is the function of operations while a line is a function of advising. So the staff feels that they are powerless because the line is not acting as per what they are wanting to act as. Staff employees may be simple resented due to their expertise and knowledge. Line does not usually accept the staff people because most of the staff employees are more technically qualified or more knowledgeable in their fields. Since they are more technically qualified, the line employees may simply resent them, or the lines may think that they have the on-job experience while the staff has only the bookish knowledge which is there, leading on to the conflicts that are there. Staff may be impatient with the line. Also, line may resist ideas. Now, the other reason for conflict between staff and line is that staff usually gets impatient with the line people because staff thinks whatever ideas they propose are implementable and can be used or followed by the line immediately. But line may resist the idea because they may not find the ideas to be very practical, or they may not find the ideas to be easily applicable. Staff has easier accessibility to the top management and is resented by the line. Staff is usually in contact with the top managements. The reason being, management is ever looking at improving the organizations, while the line is always feeling that they are the people who are doing the job and still do not have the access to the management directly. Staff is usually younger and educated, and line believes their ideas are only theoretical and non-practical. Most of the staff employees in most of the organizations are younger and educated compared to the line employees. Line employees are people who have learnt the art with their own hands and have grown. So they feel that the staff people are usually theoretical and come up with non-practical ideas, leading on to conflicts. Conflict about degree of importance. Staff line has grown in an organization. The whole sense of importance creates the conflict. Both line and staff feel that they are important in the organization. This growth in the conflict leads on to serious conflict in the organizations. Line mostly has the complaint that staff takes the credit in case of success and passes the blame in case of failures. Usually, line has the complaint that staff, if an operation or a function works well, takes the credit and if the function does not perform well, passes on the blame to them, leading on to conflicts between the two. Staff are usually involved in long range staff are usually involved staff are usually involved in long range issues, while line has concerns mainly regarding the short range issues. The staff is looking at a long-term developmental strategy, while the line is looking at an applicable strategy on the ground level for a short term, which means staff is futuristic thinking while line function is present operational thinking. Now when these two thinking processes clash with each other, it leads on to conflicts in the organization. We move on to the next cause of conflict into the structural aspect of the organization, and the third component in the structural aspect is the participation aspect. If participation is not allowed, it leads to conflict in the organizations. But on the other hand, greater participation leads to higher levels of conflicts. The rise in conflict due to participation are mainly due to greater awareness and want of people to enforce their own viewpoints in the organization. Other aspects related to these causing conflicts are, which we will see later, but before that, let us understand how participation affects the organizational structure. It's a two-way sword which is there, participation, which means if organization does not allow participation by the employees, it leads on to the conflicts in the organizations, which means people do not like being left out. People want to participate, and if the management tries to control, or the structure of the organization tries to control participation of the employees, it leads on to conflicts. While on the other hand, if greater participation is allowed, it also leads on to higher levels of conflicts, because greater level of participation means more viewpoints, means more disagreements, means more people trying to enforce their viewpoint onto the decision-making process that is there. So, participation is actually a two-way sword for conflict aspects. In both the cases, it can lead on to more conflicts. If you allow, then also it leads on to more conflicts. If you don't allow, then also it leads on to more conflicts. So organizations need to be very careful while allowing the participation, and allowing the participation aspect carefully so that it can be beneficial for the organization without coming up with a lot of conflicts. The aspect of participation is related to the aspect of awareness and the aspect of people trying to enforce. As awareness increases, people try to enforce their viewpoints more. Therefore, it leads on to conflicts. Let's look at the other conflict causing scenarios. The other conflict causing scenarios in the structural aspect of the organization are role ambiguity. What is role ambiguity? Ill-defined work activities. Roles leads to conflicts between individuals and especially people who are dependent on them. In other words, if people are not clear about their roles, if people are not clear about their work activities, it leads on to conflicts between individuals and the people. Or in other words, if an organizational structure is designed in a manner where people do not have the role clarity or the job clarity, it will always lead on to the conflicts that are there. Design of work flow. Intergroup problems are mainly the result of poorly designed workflow and poorly planned coordinational activities. It's an example of where there are differences between a cook and a waiter. Let's try and understand this. Intergroup problems resulting out of poorly designed design flow. If an organization does not give its work flow a proper structuring, then people will get into conflict and blame each other for the problems that are happening. We have an example of a cook and a waiter. Suppose a person walks into a restaurant and gives an order. If the flow of this task is not proper, which means the waiter does not take the order properly, passes it on to the cook properly, all the instructions, the cook, if receiving or non-receiving on the information, does not follow the instructions properly, and the waiter serves the food and the client does not like it, it's a problem of workflow. Somewhere or the other, the work flowing situation has not gone in well, or the time period in which the customer should have been served did not happen is a problem of the workflow. So organizations need to design their structuring in a manner where work flows smoothly, where work can be handled in a proper manner. The last but not the least is the scarcity of resources. Scarcity of resources will always lead on to conflicts. Whenever resources are scarce, competition and conflicts become intense. Everybody wants to have a piece of the pie. People will squabble over the resources in the organization. So, if the resources are limited or if the resources are lesser, it will always lead on to conflicts in the organization. So, all these points that we have seen are components of the structural aspects relating or actually getting up into conflicts. We will quickly run through this so that it is clear to all of us that which are the structural aspects of conflicts. One is the size of the organization. Number two is the line and staff distinction and the conflict between them. Number three is the participation aspect which leads on. Number four is the role ambiguity. Number five is the design of workflow. And number six is the scarcity of resources. So all these six components are components of the organizational structural design which leads to conflicts. With this, we have seen the reasons or the causes of conflicts in organizations. We have identified what are the factors which cause the conflict in the organization. From here, we will move on to the second part, which is finding out ways and means of handling this situation, finding out ways and means of how to control this situation. So, we are looking at the strategies to overcome conflicts that have arisen. The best and the most easiest way of overcoming conflicts is, as they say, prevention is better than cure. So, the first strategy to overcome conflict is preventing conflict, or in other words, organizations taking steps or designing things so that the chances of conflicts are minimized. I'm not saying finished because they will never be finished. So, organizations coming up with options where the chances of conflicts are minimized. So, what is it that organizations can do so that conflicts can be minimized or can be prevented? Let's look at them one by one. The first thing organizations can do to prevent conflicts is goal structure, which means it has to be well defined, the role and contribution of each unit and individual so that they do not overlap or do not come in conflict with each other. If the goal structure is clear, chances of conflicts are dramatically reduced. Let's look at the second point which can help in preventing conflicts, the reward system. The compensation system in the organization should be such that it should not create competition and conflict, which means people should feel that they are being paid the right amount of compensation for the work that they do. Do not get people into a comparative or a competitive mode, which means you should not have a varied salary aspect which is there. People should be paid similar or same for the same job in the organizations. This will reduce the conflict to a great extent. Trust and communication. Build on the trust and communication. Developing trust among people is very important, and this leads to better communication and avoids conflicts. The whole feel factor and the whole trust factor within an organization makes a lot of change or makes a lot of important aspects. If people in an organization trust and communicate well with each other, they would relatively have much lesser conflicts that are there. The fourth thing an organization can do is to coordinate. It is known aspect that a well-coordinated activity reduces conflicts greatly. If the organization puts its functions and tasks in proper coordination, it is bound to have lesser conflicts arising. The coordination amongst people, coordination amongst groups, coordination amongst different operations makes a hell lot of difference when it comes to controlling conflicts. So we've seen the first strategy to overcome conflicts in the organization is preventing conflicts, which can be done by structuring the goals, putting in a proper reward system, building trust and communication, and ensuring proper coordination. Let's move on to the other strategies. Resolving behavioral conflict is the second strategy that is there. Resolving behavioral conflict. Ignoring the conflict in many cases is advisable to take passive role in resolving conflicts, as by doing this many conflicts die a natural death. One way of handling or resolving behavioral conflicts is by simply ignoring the conflict. A lot of conflicts have a natural death. They may die out within a few minutes, a few hours, or on the outside a few days. So it is advisable to take a passive role and not get into direct resolving and let the conflicts die out a natural death. If conflicts die out a natural death, that is very well suited for the organization. The second technique in resolving the behavioral conflict is called as smoothing. It means covering up the conflict by appealing for harmony, peace and unity. This type of a solution is usually a temporary one, and conflicts would surface again sooner or later. This approach means kill the conflict at the moment that it has come up for the time being by the task of appealing for peace and unity. Or in other words, if there is a conflict, try to pacify, try to cool down things, try to solve the things at that point of time. But soothing or smoothing is not really the solution. It only pushes the conflict to a underground situation which has to resurface. So smoothing is a technique which is used or can be utilized in behavioral conflict for having a control over for a limited period of time. It does not resolve the problem per se. The third way of resolving behavioral conflict is compromising. Balancing between the two conflicting parties with the feeling of give and take for reaching a solution to the conflict is termed as compromising. This type of solution is a win-win situation for both the parties. The third and the most commonly adopted technique for resolving behavior pattern is compromising, bringing together both the parties to agree upon a give and take situation where both the parties feel satisfied and happy is called compromising. It is a solution which is a win-win for both the parties, because in this type of a resolution, none of the two are losing out on any of the aspects. The next is called as the forcing technique. This type of resolving is a technique of dominance. In this case, the power to enforce own views cause resentments, hostility, and can backfire on both the parties. This type of technique is of dominance, which means one of the parties is being forced to accept the solution. The power to enforce one's own views causes resentment, hostility, and can backfire for both the parties, which means if one party tries to enforce its viewpoint or is able to get its viewpoint agreed upon, it is bound to bounce back as hostility or resentment at a later stage. So forcing per se is not a very good conflict handling technique that is there. The next technique is called as the problem solving. Confronting the problem, analyzing it, and choosing the best solution is called as the problem solving approach. So one of the other approaches for solving behavioral conflicts is by confronting it, looking at all the possible parameters and selecting the best option that is available. These conflicts are usually due to organizational environment, and they can be resolved and prevented by either redesigning the structure or the workflow in organizations, which means conflicts can be resolved by redesigning the structure of the organization or the workflow in the organization, as if that is done, behavioral conflicts would be far lesser. The interdependence of people and department on other leads to conflicts, and this needs to be addressed. Wherever over interdependence of people is there, organizations need to work out on means and ways where this can be reduced so that conflicts can be reduced. So these are some of the techniques or strategies by which conflicts in organizations can be handled or managed. Let's look at one last concept, which is stimulating conflict. This is contrary to the topic of saying let's control conflict. Here we are saying let's stimulate conflict. It is a necessary and a desirable act in order to create changes and challenges in an organization. Too much satisfaction, low rate of employee turnover, shortage of new ideas, friendly relationships affecting organizational goals are some of the reasons why stimulating conflict is necessary. Or in other words, we are saying organizations would plant conflicts in them. Why? Because it helps them to reduce too much of satisfaction in people, which may lead to lethargy and a laxed approach. Low rate of employee turnover, which means none of the people are leaving an organization and fresh blood is not rolling into the organization. Shortage of new ideas, because people have stopped thinking in the organization. Friendly relationships affecting organization goals, which means people have become too supportive of each other and the organizational goals are actually suffering. The question is how to stimulate conflict in the organization. Appoint a manager who supports change. Get in a person who would support change. Get in a person on the top who would like to not follow the laid down rules as they are blindly. Encourage competition. If competition is intense, it would sooner or later result in conflict. So organizations can encourage competition to a point that it leads to conflicts. Manipulate scarcity, or in other words, create scarcity, because whenever scarcity is going to be there, it is going to lead on to conflicts. playing on status difference, which means play on people's statuses, put in younger people on top, or bring down people with more experience to lesser important jobs, and it leads on to conflicts. Stimulating conflict is a tool used by organizations in the current times. With this, we come to the summary of this chapter. It says, causes of conflicts are varied. They need to be handled differently depending on the source of the conflicts. Different strategies are implemented to resolve the conflicts by organizations. Stimulating conflict is a management tool and can lead to better organizations in today's times. I hope with this you have understood the causes of conflicts, you have understood the strategies of how to manage conflicts, and you have understood the concept of stimulating conflict by organizations for better management. Thank you very much, and I hope everything is quite clear.